decades ago. Arguably one of the most influential landscape design practices in the country, the firm is known for its research legacy and an unconventional understanding of urban and natural landscapes. Aniket Bhagwat studied architecture from for Environmental Planning and Technology, CEPT, Ahmedabad, and pursued his master's in landscape architecture from School of Planning and Architecture, SPA, New Delhi. Drawing on the depth of his familiarity with the specialization since childhood, Aniket is known to be an outspoken and stimulating writer, thinker, and an academician. He co-edits and writes for Spade, a chronicle on design research, theory, and narrative, the only peer-driven design magazine in the country. Through his discourse and practice, he strives to bridge the gap between profession and academics and involve design through discussion and criticism. He is of the belief that there are no bad students as such, but just inept teachers who mislead students into disarray. His renegade approach to education, design, and research and writing has inspired many, helping them to take on the conviction, rigor, and responsibilities of design. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is a very, very old introduction. I must, I must renew it one of these days. It's almost about 15 years ago, but thank you none the same, and it's a pleasure of being here. It's an absolute pleasure. So how do we start this?
Would you like to say something before we play the video?
Well, I mean, not nothing specific to the talk, just to thank you very much and thank Rohan and thank KRVIA. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today, albeit virtually. I hope all of you are safe and things are good or as good as they can be under the circumstances. I would also like to thank what seems to be a large number of people who have joined in today, and I can see the number going up. So just for the people who are going to listen to this talk, a little bit about it. So this is a 34-minute talk. It's not very long, but all I can request everyone to do is to really pay attention to the words, because I think they are important. The images are really, sort of they hold the words. It's not the other way around. I think the words are more important. And the way the talk is structured is that at several points in the talk, at least about 12 points in the talk, there is silence and there is text on the screen. One has tried to time it in a manner in which everybody gets some time to read the text. So please read the text. You may have to hurry a little bit when you're reading the text. And of course, at the end of it, I'll be very, very happy to hear what people have to say and discuss this a little more. I'm sure Rohan is somewhere around. So hello, Rohan, and thank you again. So we could start, I guess.
All right.
An eulogy to slain time. Black. Are there any other colors? I see them rarely now. I see black. Dotted by the hues of pyres, surreal glows, portals of life. This madness, this horrific madness, these savage scars have seared our being, and we have changed forever. Beyond the pain, the agonizing sense of helplessness, ransoming in our minds, we must ask, did the past mean anything? Does it give us the passport to live today and tomorrow? Or was it all for nothing? We must ask, if only to renew our lease with this planet. Architects, we are a strange breed, indulgent, egotistic, sure of self, brash even, perhaps greatly delusional too. Sometimes we cloak ourselves with arbors of quicksilver, often a pretense, sometimes a refuge. What do we really stand for? Who are our gods? Are we God with shining metal, swords in our hands, wanting to win a war fought with bullets? Or do we imagine, perhaps even convince ourselves, that the swords we carry are cosmic weapons and that they can duel any fate? If we had to swear an oath before we were let loose, what would it have been? To do good to the planet and its beings? Perhaps. But it's an oath many could have sworn. What would be ours? Only ours. To create spaces that heal people and nature, that talk to the past, the present, and the future, that have tales like many clues embedded in them for some to find, others to seek, and yet others to make their own. To distill life as we understand it and infuse it in the bones of the spaces we imagine. Perhaps that would have been our oath. Would we use words like bringing dignity, sheltering people, providing succor? Perhaps we could. But that could not be our oath, not ours alone, because it's one many could have sworn. Then, from time to time, we must ask if we have lived this imagined oath, and when threatened with the end, as we are today, it is a time that one must ask with brutal honesty, do we have the passport to live? Have we earned that right? What shall we make then about a grand man now yonder, who stood in the summer cauldron, surrounded by rocks breathing fire, and imagined the forest? And then for years toiled and tapped streams and seeded the soil and nurtured it with love, till the rocks were cloaked with skins of green and the water filled to the brim, and the birds made it their home. What shall we make of this place, decades after its being, with many owners changing hands, and each new owner swearing to uphold the purpose of the land and let it sing its own poem? Will we think that a seed was planted, that it will regenerate when the tides turn, when the seasons ebb? What will we make about a forest and a lake that was imagined on a land to make place for a house at the cusp of the fields and wilderness, built of waste, of stones thrown away, of cords of domesticity that pay tribute to the birth of Basil, from the churning of fire, of water that is wild, strewn with pink, of wild grasses that talk to the breeze. Will we imagine that perhaps it was always so, that it was never a barren land, and gently a home was nestled in its arms? Will we imagine the world the way it was meant to be, and not the way we willed it to be? What will we make of a being that revolted against the mayhem that is our city and grew gills to breathe but never see? That like us, its skin aged and weathered, and as it grew older, it became pensive, perhaps even stoic. And in its bosom celebrated life, with bricks fired with hand, walls that danced and swayed, and pirouetted and twirled. And even as they danced as if free, the strings that held life stayed, tenuous, taut, but in place. Will we tell ourselves that it's okay to be different, to be human, but different, to shield ourselves from the world we ill understand, to turn our face from the wretchedness that surrounds us, and yet celebrate life for the precious gift it is? Or what will we make of a feudal fort where fountains pay tribute to the women of such harsh lands, internalize pain, and hold in their wombs the elixir of life? Or courts where a rough-hewn throne sits at the edge of the black orb and gazes from the rim of the universe? Or water, like a flower, lazily licks the dark stone and hurries along in deep meditation and vanishes, only to keep appearing? Ludicrous soldiers that gaze at the valley, waiting for an attack they imagine imminent when none will come. Or will it? Of memories of gardens centuries old, of their birth before they became celestial, when a central well fed the soil that sprouted food. Will we tell ourselves that sometimes it's all right to tell stories that few can understand, or even few care to, but it's okay to seed intrigue, to plant curiosity, so that the mind wanders and imagines of a world that we cannot dream of? Or what will we make of exhilarating madness when the sky at times is dotted by the moons, and at others with clouds and stars that twinkle, sometimes with a cloud-strewn night, and at others shine bright, of a place where the walls are like folded cloth. The gates have eyes, and prayer wheels whirl in a tumultuous swirl of all the mad emotions that make us. Hate, joy, pride, pity, anger, and every other emotion known to man. Will we allow ourselves that we are but alive and human and full of life? And we want to dance and sing our heart's content and hold close those we love and scream till the nights echo with our whoops. And what will we make of a house on a hill, threaded with steel, a place, a perch, to watch the drama of nature, to see its wild grasses that tread the land, etched with a line of red, reminding us of the whimsy of man. Its fine preening gardens, like giant buttons of green, gather and rush, urging you to thread the house. Of plants in patterns that echo the fine colors of stone and the rippled concrete, where in seemingly eternal time, a floating man in orbs of glass sways slowly, held in place, and yearns each day to be free. Two giant beings in brick stand in conversation and preside over the space, conversing with the stones and the landscape beyond. Reeds of steel with heads of clay, peer with inquisitive visages, fireflies in the night. And in the morning light, change garbs and hope to camouflage, shimmer on silver water, and waltz with the grasses that surround. Where ribbons of metal, suspended precariously, hang and twine. Leaves and the forbidden fruit fused, a double helix. Life clings, sometimes only just. Will you admit that it is those that inhabit who make the space, enrich it, fill it with life? Our means are meager. All we can hope for is to give life a stage. That happiness is lonely in the act of creation, but overjoyed, seeing creatures of many hearts and quirks nestling and calling it home. And what will you make if I told you about a garden of the mind, a mental labyrinth, dizzyingly unreal, where only the sky and the river can steady a whirling mind, even darting, yet calm and alert. And further, if it inspired a new age place of work, where many pathways led and led astray, and between them are held worlds, each a tale of land and man, and the innumerable ways to converse, of water that is tranquil, wild grasses and a rare tree, on steel-rimmed islands where birds can be free, courts planted with seasonals, food for the table, another minuet into the walls of nature. Thin soils on slabs of parking, planted with ideas of wilderness, bring close nature, its chaotic glory and seeming mess. Of courts with lost trees, each one presided by those we may lose one day, a place to sit and converse with them, knowing that they have much to say. Will you say that the past needs a conversation, one in which we drown in a heady mix, that it has lessons that none can teach us now? Will you allow that we need to find ways of living our part, make kin with land, of being one, and with a caring heart? And then, what have I told you about a wall inscribed with the watermark of the city of stately trees etched in concrete, cast as the visage or perhaps a mask, of colliding boxes dicing the sky, mottled light as the sun crashes through, seemingly quiet, taunt with energy, waiting to uncoil and implode without a din, as if a death of a distant star, precariously held, straining from their fastenings, as if to leap in an orbital loop, a space of silence and ethereal beauty. Of an underground cavern, sculpted, a forest of trees, lit, phosphorus fires, silhouettes in the dark. A faraway place of magical myth where the mind can soar, weightless and lit. A stony wall that inscribes the story of the tree and how we have maligned it over time, urging us to reconsider broadcasting the crime. Of lightly floating traverses of cloth, a river and its tail, bearing marks, scars, and wounds of how we men fail. Like a possessed swirl, lunging, darting, snaking, haunting corridors, reminding us the perils of the world that's sadly in the making. Would you allow me to suggest that every moment is precious? There is nothing ordinary about life, nothing banal. With both hands must we clasp it and talk with it, often with empathy, but mostly shake it, celebrate it, ring a resounding cheer, so that many can partake and yet many others can hear. And then, what will you say of a house disdainful of most, that discourages people with boulders that only the initiated can traverse, that revels in discontinuities, in sudden changes where the Spartan rocks hide a sensuous chord, that is moist, gentle, and gurgles with cisterns of mist, and layered with feathery green, of places hidden, a pond, a secret, with trees as sentinels, a place to lose self, to hide from those who ask, or behind tall walls of stone, amidst water that crashes, seats close to each other, so that words of mutiny are drowned and dissipate. Corridors laden with eerie musicians and trunks of nails, men around the corner, and many such unsettling tales of rugged stone and rustling steel, and yet a place that shocks to heal. Of garnal trees, their ancestry tattooed on their body, and serene gardens like soft cloth engulf and take the edge of the seemingly bristling, restless one. Will you agree that even those with crusty ways hide rib cages with a warm heart, that choose reluctantly to befriend, beguile, make someone else fused with self an inseparable part? Do we judge too quickly? Are we all driven away, perplexed, even repulsed, and lose the chance to find one who has so much to say? Or even that we seek sameness, or logically continuities, or the compelling will of reason, when life is anything but that? And what will you make of a palace serene and imperious, that carefully, cautiously treads amongst the trees, that holds amidst it a court of tranquil water, soft hues render edges, and then an island of green, silent structures in the brick, watchful and content, leaving behind noise, anxiety, avarice, and all that is ill spent. Of a scented labyrinth, to walk at a slow pace and unlayer the hubris that plagues the human race. Or the memory of the fields that are still tilled, and now of a cosmic song, its notes with silence filled. Of canyons of green that rush and dissect, and paint man and nature with a single brush. Will you allow that there is time for silence, for reflecting without noise, for finding that place, empty and yet dazzlingly rich, with life's joys? Will you agree that the meaning of balance is not a limited, mediocre, singular one, but one needing its essence to find resonance in every act, in just about every one? On a road pulsating with humanity's full cast, a park, a narrow sliver in a city that slowly sheds its past. The mills dismantled now, the chimneys long dead. A human tragedy still lingers, not laid to bed. A graveyard, and on its bones, the city triumphantly marches through, taller, higher, faster, intoxicated on a heady brew. Over turbulent seas and passages that it made, the port has moved, stripping memories, even the faint markings now begin to fade. Of its birth, from many islands fused, filling oceans, vast tracts of land where many ecologies were historically abused. Of its conquered past, or streets in the city, lined with flowers on sale. Much like these stories that sadly don't last. Can we say that it's about the stories that we fail? Every noun, every one, every place, every incident is a tale, read from a scroll that slowly becomes dust, one we must glue, renew, and retell. For sanity, for mankind, for us, this is a must. And finally, how can we not smile at a young couple seeking to be wed, at a time when the world was being slain and left to dead? On a barren land, with time they had none, equipped with smiles that rippled in the laden air, hearts warmer than the summer sun. They egged, even begged, that a paradise be planted and grown double time, and flower and queue, and make their union blessed and divine. We hurried, we scurried. It was a frenetic race. Grasses were seeded, tall and short. Flowers of many hues slowly found their place. And as if ordained by the gods, on the chosen day, a garden so delightful, a gift of nature on grand display. Riots of red, seas of yellows, blades of green together, a medley of hope. Will you then agree that even when it's the darkest, even when there is no hope to give, there always is a waif-like tug that says, we will live. And eulogy to slain time then, a moment to ask, do we have the license to live? What is our purpose? What is the task? A rush to answer may not be preferred. Instead, when alone, a voice deep inside, if you strain hard enough, is perhaps heard. Fearful am I of those whose righteous bugles blare loud, who gaze at this orb as if from a celestial cloud. As we plod and pause and then resume, as we stop and ponder, then lumber along, we sometimes feel poetry, making connections, telling tales of yore, being kind and true, and search meanings of life is perhaps one way that we will slowly heal. I shudder at those who talk about an apocalyptic world. It's terrible. It's horrific, and that's true. But there's much left to seek and much to do. Dismiss then these evil notions in the mind. There's a world out there, and that fact is not changing too.
I can't hear you if somebody's talking.
No, go ahead.
Sorry? No, I'm done. I mean, in the sense.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the insightful talk. It was really beautiful and enlightening. I would now like to invite Sandeep to respond.
Sorry. Did you ask me or? No. Sandeep, yeah. Hi, Sandeep. Can't hear you, Sandeep. You are on mute.
That's what I was asking, whether I was audible or not. Anyways, this is really nice to meet you, sir. I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, very audible, Sandeep.
Yeah, I'm actually lost for words because it was such a poetic presentation. I mean, if I may, it was almost poignant to the level where I was kind of, holding back my emotions. I mean, it was so touching to see those beautiful, meticulously designed projects, but not in a format that one would actually imagine a landscape architect to present, but rather, in such a poetic way. I mean, you're right, in a way, it actually raises more questions, which are probably not to be answered in one go, but rather, to kind of reflect on and, kind of think about, while one is alone. So I think, thank you very much for that. I mean, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so while I was actually, kind of going through the presentation and, listening to those words and seeing those images, I was intrigued, kind of ask you one question. And that was this. I mean, if you may allow me, then I can actually go ahead and ask.
Of course.
So, why? I mean, I'm actually intrigued to know the design process that you kind of adopt, while you see a site and while you actually put your ideas together and, kind of do a project. So, are these thoughts, I mean, are these words, these emotions that you kind of presented today, with the help of those images, from those fragments of what you've created, or rather what you've responded to at a site? I mean, I mean, do they evolve or have they always been there as a part of your design process?
So I think, to answer that sort of honestly, I think we all see a different kind of value in a project much after it's done. I mean, once a project is done and executed, and then you visit it over the years or over the decades, I think a lot of meanings come to you, which perhaps are not always imagined as possible when you're actually executing the project. But which is not to say that when one is thinking of these projects, one's mind is truly consumed by ideas of sort of building a narrative. And I wouldn't say philosophical narrative, because I have a position on that, and I believe that a narrative has to be created basis the nature of audience or the nature of context. So sometimes it's a fairly straightforward telling of a story, and sometimes it's a little more abstract, and sometimes it could be philosophical. It doesn't matter. There could be different kinds of narratives. But that the work has to, in some sense, to tell stories that make connections which are not embedded within the idea of the project is something that I think has been something that we believed in for a very, 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 very long time. Uh, I think we are storytellers. We like to tell stories. Uh, we think that design or spatial design, whether it's landscape architecture, whether it's architecture, whether it's interior design, is an extremely potent tool to be able to tell the stories that you cannot otherwise tell. I mean, so where can you tell stories of this kind? Where can you tell these stories which are lived? Where can you tell these stories which are embodied? Where can you tell these stories where the body is sort of engulfed by them? Even in theater, you're the audience and you're watching it on the stage. In a movie, watching it on the stage, but here you're the actor in that space. And because you're the actor in that space, if you can leave clues or triggers or a scenography or a relationship, sometimes, is something that you want to leave there as a designer. But more often than not, I think new stories emerge, mostly ones that you didn't expect. But I think that space needs to be there to allow the story to tell its own story, to allow a space to tell its own story. So I guess to answer your question then, no, I don't think we start any project or we end any project with a distinct clarity of what it will mean. We hope that it will mean many things, but as time goes, some of the things that we thought should mean a lot don't mean so much, but new things attain meaning. And the only pleasure then is to say that you've created a space, you've created a sort of set of relationships that can talk to each other continuously and keep sort of building new stories. So yeah, I mean, that would be an honest recounting of process, so to say. Yes. Yeah. You're on mute again. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think there's a certain lag, so that's why. I hope I'm audible now.
Yes.
So thank you for being honest and kind of responding to that. I mean, I think it does answer the question that I had asked. So before we move on, I'm sure there are a lot of students from KRVIA and a lot of guests from other places who are actually waiting to probably have an interaction with you or ask questions and get to know more. But before we move on, I had one more kind of question which just came up when I was seeing the presentation. I mean, in one of the slides, you did mention that happiness is kind of lonely in creation.
Yes.
But one finds a joy in seeing, how many diverse creatures have actually made that project, right? So, I mean, I thought that was amazing. That was an amazing statement. Could you tell us about one such instance, or what really kind of provoked you to kind of to kind of
So, I
pen
mean,
those words?
it's like anything else in life, right? I mean, uh, it could be something as simple as your birthday or going out on a date or a wedding in your family and so on and so forth, right? Uh, the actual act of putting together is a lot of work and you sort of, think it through, but it's a lonely act. It's a very, very lonely act, right? And there is no, I mean, there's satisfaction that you've been able to put it together well, but there's no satisfaction if you don't find subsequently organisms, and I'm not saying people, I'm saying organisms of all kinds, both innate and inanimate and animate. It doesn't matter what those organisms are. It could be a piece of art, it could be sculpture, that's there too. That they find their place in what you've done. And it's only when you start finding that these organisms are beginning to enjoy what you've done that I think you actually feel satisfied about it. There's a certain energy to want to do it again. But I think it's a fairly, I mean, I think this is true that all design, at least I don't want to pontificate and I don't want to preach, but I think as designers, we must be very mindful of the fact that doing something, well, means just about that much. But to be able to introspect and evaluate and investigate and live the life that will occupy whatever that you've done and find meaning out of that is a far greater and more valuable act than the act of putting together things. The act of putting together things is important, but not as important as beginning to say, what have you put it together for? I mean, what kind of life have you allowed it to live? And if you can, and if those answers are poor, then you must go back and ask yourself whether you're putting together things in the right way in the first place, because then clearly you're not. So yes, there is no great happiness. I mean, I'm empty at the end of every project. I'm spent and I'm empty. I don't have the energy to, want to go and see it. But it's only a few weeks and months and years later that I begin to enjoy it, because you begin to see people enjoying it, I guess, things enjoying it. Yeah.
Thank you for the answer. So I guess we can throw the floor open for questions.
I would also like to invite Manoj to speak.
Hi, Aniket.
Hi, Manoj. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? We met, I guess, long back when I was invited for your second edition of 12 by 12.
Yes, I remember that very well. Yeah.
So, very intriguing presentation. I think it raises lots of curious questions, especially to the displaced relationship that we have between, or among rather architecture, landscape and nature. I think, I think all these questions need not be talked about or answered, but I think the silence is the only way, I guess, you can kind of interpret these relations. I think a very fascinating presentation. I don't want to spend too much time. I think, Sandeep, please, a lot of questions are there from students. I think it's their forum, so I think let's go ahead with that. Thanks, Aniket.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manoj. So we are throwing the floor open for the questions. Students, over to you.
Also, can I request Shilpa Chandawakar to speak? Sorry.
While Shilpa is coming on, I'm very impressed to see Goa has got good Wi-Fi network. So.
Shilpa, are you there?
No, I don't think so.
I thought maybe she's unable to speak. Yeah, I would like to invite anyone now to feel free to unmute themselves and speak. Since I think they're
I think we need to
hesitant to pose questions. So
I think
there are also a few comments in the chat box.
Oh, there are?
Flo, would you like to read them out?
Sure.
Yeah, well, I'm not so tech savvy, so I don't know how the hell to open this chat box. If somebody can read it out, I'll be happy to answer, sir.
Yeah, we'll do that for you, sir. Flo, over to you.
Thierry said that it was inspirational and thought-provoking as always. And Nitin said a great talk. And Jana Mary said poetry, storytelling, photography, philosophy, design, science all merged into one short narrative, which it just went on and on. We really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank you.
yes, if there are any other questions, please post it too. Tanuja said it was a very delightful presentation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So while somebody is coming up with the question, I'd just like to say one thing that sort of making this choice of trying to construct this presentation in this manner. I think within the office there was some debate about whether this is a fair way of talking about projects, because one doesn't end up then explaining the projects in great detail. And students or people who are the audience are left with little snippets of the project and are unable to really sort of make sense of the entire project. And at some level, I kind of believe that, there have to be many different ways of talking about projects. And I think there is the regular way where you are actually beginning to show plans and sections and explaining it in great detail. But I also think that there is increasingly the need, at least in my mind, to talk about projects using different forms of narrative and not the conventional forms of narrative, which is, talk about the plans or talk about the sketches or talk about the models and so on and so forth. But to really talk about emotions that are linked to the work that we do. So it's a choice, and I'm sorry if some people are left with saying, but we didn't get a sense of the full project. To them, all I will request is that please go to the website, and the website really has all these projects explained in absolute detail. And even after that, if there's some questions, please drop me a mail, and I will respond to it. So yeah, in the meanwhile, if somebody has questions.
I think there's a question by someone, I think, on the screen. Please go ahead and ask.
Yeah, it's not a question. It's just something I really want to share with all of you. I was working with Aniket sir for a very long time, and I was rendering Arjun Handa's master plan, the landscape layout, in great detail. So every tree was different. Every neem tree was different from the orchard. And then I reached the lake where this deck is there. And if I'm not wrong, that's where you said that garden has spaces where you lose yourself. And I want to share this, that when I was rendering the deck and the lotuses and the grasses around, and actually I was there. I was sitting in the office, but in my imagination, I was there in the garden. And I think I found myself there. And I connected to the landscape of that house. That has touched me. I'm the diversity of the journey, the dry court, the moist court, and everything. The entire garden was beautiful, and I think gardens have helped me find myself. Yeah, it is. So I loved the presentation. So it's so poetic, and I miss working with you, sir. Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Shravan, would you like to read out your question?
Sure. Sorry.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I really love the poetic connections that you were kind of forging between your designs and the larger kind of connections that you do through them and they had to decide. But what was this initial spark that kind of asked you to draw these connections across your designs and across these landscapes?
So I think it's a little I mean, my answer is likely to sound a little similar to the first one that Sandeep asked me. See, I mean, in this, all I can say is that I think that as people, we must remember, first of all, that we're human beings of this planet, and we are architects, and we are landscape architects, and whatever that we are after that. And I think that we need to be able to sort of find meaning in what we do, and a meaning in what we do in every possible way. I mean, so I don't think that there's a single way in which you can find meaning. I'm not saying, and I stress over and over again that it doesn't have to be some extremely academic or intense or philosophical or abstract meaning, but just meanings, just simple meanings that are emotive, that sort of connect with your idea of life, that help you to sort of talk to other people through your work. I think it's a belief. So it's just the way that, we've thought about work for a very long time, that that if our work is incapable of touching people's lives and getting them to reflect about their relationship with others, and that others, again, I stress, is not other human beings. It could be any others. It could be nature, it could be insects, it could be butterflies, it could be the clouds, it could be rain. It doesn't matter. But if it doesn't help you to reflect on those relations and find and forge better bonds, then how are we going to live on this planet? I mean, how is it possible that if we do not create spaces that allow us this reflection, where do you think is it possible for us to introspect, to find ourselves, and to find our relationships? So it's just a belief. So I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that we are successful or not successful, or that this is the only way to do it. I'm sure there are hundreds of ways of imagining design. All I'm saying is that I think it's extremely important that design must ask itself the nature of relationships that it can help foster amongst creatures. Does that answer the question, or was I rambling? Hello? I think I was rambling.
Sandeep, do you want to go ahead and read the questions?
Yeah. I think there is a certain lag because of which I'm sure even Shravan may not have been able to unmute. And
Right. Yeah.
Bhagwat.
Saranya, you have something to say?
Shravan?
Oh, Shravan, sorry, Shravan.
No, I think he says thank you. He's typing
It's a
it.
sign. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a comment from Deirdre Prince from Dublin. She says,
Yes, of course. Hi, Deirdre. How are you? Yes.
Yeah, she says she thinks that this was the overlying message that she gets from your work is a feeling of hope.
Well, Deirdre is a good friend, and she just invited me to talk in Dublin. So she's very kind. But yes, I think hope. I mean, without hope, there isn't much left, right? But of course, hope. Yes.
So then we have Ankur Jajpuria, who says, Ankur Jajpuria, who says that this was a very interesting presentation as always. It's a pleasure to hear you. He asks, sir, do you think a user's perspective towards design will change now after this unfortunate pandemic?
So Ankur, I mean, I think that all of us have sat in enough and more discussions, formal and informal, and there have been forums and there have been talks, and everybody's sort of focusing on this pandemic as we must. I do believe that it's a little early to be sort of evaluating what is the kind of world that will be left, or what is the nature of the world that will be left after the pandemic is over. We are still in the middle of the pandemic. And I think it's not particularly wise to imagine circumstances